Alrighty, so a new week and a new unit of work for you guys. It's going to be a bit of a respite for some of you today. We've moved on from algebra. We had a pretty strenuous week where we did algebra revision and algebra applications in a big filthy algebra test. We get to take our foot off the pedal a bit today because with starting measurement, it's really important before we jump into the main important parts of measurement, which is perimeter, area, volume, things like that. Do we know how to convert with our units and work with mixed units? So having questions, because when you get to year 9, unfortunately, all your diagrams start to mix up the units. So you've got centimeters next to millimeters, next to meters, next to kilometers. You'll have to know how to convert them properly before you can actually do your calculations. So the thing you're learning today is how to convert between different units of measurement, and it'll be in 1 and 2 dimensions. So we're going to be doing it with length, and we're going to be doing it with area as well. It's going to be basically revision for most of you guys, but it's really important we go back over it. Otherwise, you'll have trouble with your area questions and your volume questions. And also, isn't it nice to have just an easier lesson for once? So to be good at your work today, you'll be able to convert your units of length, so turning kilometers into meters, into centimeters, into millimeters. You'll be able to do the same thing with area, with kilometers squared and meters squared and centimeters squared and millimeters squared, because it's different than with length. And if you get stuck and you don't know how many kilometers go into a meter or how many meters in a kilometer, you'll have flowcharts to help you through it. And you can use your calculators, so it'll be tough to get questions wrong today, as long as you follow those flowcharts. All right, so let's get into it. So when I'm talking about flowcharts to help you with your work, this is what I mean. If you're keeping your glossary from a previous year, there'll be something very, very similar to this in it already, but it's really important that you have this copied down in your glossary, or you copy it down. So pause the video, write it down in your book nice and neat, so you can just follow along and get your answers right. Yeah, your heading for this one would be converting units of length, and it just shows you how many of one unit go into another unit, right? So most of us would know that there are 1,000 meters in a kilometer, right? So if I need to turn an amount of kilometers into a matching amount of meters, I just times by 1,000. If I need to go the other way, I divide by 1,000. And we can do the same thing for meters into centimeters, right? There's 100 centimeters in a meter, or centimeters into millimeters. There's 10 millimeters in a centimeter. We can jump between measurements, so we can jump from meters to millimeters if we need to, because there's 1,000 millimeters in a meter. And say we had to go from kilometers to centimeters or kilometers to millimeters, it doesn't hurt to just follow the flowchart and do 2 steps. We'll do some examples of this, and because you've got your calculators, hopefully you'll get these right. Okay, so the questions today are nice and friendly because they'll tell you what kind of unit you need to convert the length you've been given into. When we're working with our area and perimeter questions, you'll just have to decide for yourself which unit makes the most sense a lot of the time. So with this first question here, we've been given the length of 3 kilometers, right? The amount of running you'd normally do for your cross country. Unfortunately, it got cancelled for you guys. We have to convert that into meters. Okay, and for the most part, most of us know that 3 kilometers is 3,000 meters because there is 1,000 meters in each kilometer. If you didn't know that off the top of your head, you're always going to have this flowchart here to go back to. So you just got to find the right part of it, right? You're finding the part that turns kilometers into meters, right? So we'd be focused on this part here. Kilometers into meters is a simple calculation of timesing by 1,000, right? So you should be just going the 3 kilometers you started with multiplied by 1,000, and that will give you your 3,000 meters, right? Really important that we put the unit there. Okay, so now we're turning 26 meters, which we can imagine in terms of a length, right? It's about the width of a room, or if it's a big room, that is, into millimeters, right? And what we should be thinking to make sure our answer makes sense is that millimeters are much, much, much smaller than meters. So to get 26 meters filled up with millimeters, I need a lot of them, right? So we're timesing because we're making a much bigger number because millimeters are much smaller. Okay, so the part of the flowchart to focus on is this part here, right? Meters into millimeters, right? We're going this way, whereas your flowchart goes both ways in case you have to divide. So we start with our 26 meters, and then we're just told, again, to multiply by 1,000, which means we just say that we've got 26,000 millimeters, right? And we've got that one right. We can move on to the next one. Okay, now I'm working with centimeters. I've got 138.5 centimeters. We're using calculators, so we don't have to be scared by decimal points, right? Our answer might be a decimal, it might not. We're turning it into meters, and meters are much well, not much, but they're bigger than centimeters. So we don't need as many meters to get 138.5 centimeters. And because we know that we've got 100 centimeters in a meter, we should know that 138.5 centimeters is 1 meter and a bit. But the flowchart will tell you exactly what to do. Centimeters into meters, right? To turn this one into that one, I have to divide by 100. So we just go 138.5 divide by 100. And there we get our 1.385. All our decimal places are there. Meters, right? Make sure you put your unit there. So last one for length, 37.8 millimeters into meters. Again, between millimeters and meters, it's basically a factor of 1,000. So this time we're going the other way, right? In this question, we turn meters into millimeters, so we need lots of them. This is going to make a very small number, right? 37.8 millimeters, very, very small, only a few centimeters. So it's much, much, much less than 1 meter, right? It's definitely not close to 1 meter. So dividing 37.8 by 1,000, as we're told to do, it's going to make a much smaller answer, right? So the decimal point is going to jump, 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 and it's going to be 0.0378 meters. So only a very, very small part of a meter. Okay, so we've done some examples where we're timesing because we're working with smaller units, so we need more of them. And we've done examples with dividing because we're working with bigger units, so we need a lot less of them. But the main thing is look at where you're starting, look at where you're going, and then find that spot on the flow chart, and it's really tough to go wrong. With length out of the way, we can have a look at area. Units of measurement for area are just different, right? Length is measured in straight lines, right? It's a straight line from here to the shops. So we can measure that in millimeters, centimeters, kilometers, whatever, right? They're straight lines. When we work with area, as you'll have been taught in previous years, area is measured in squares. So we use square centimeters, square millimeters, things like that. And unfortunately for you guys, they convert differently and they relate differently as well, right? It's a pretty commonly known fact that a millimeter would fit on a centimeter, you know, about 10 times, right? You take that little length and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But squares behave differently, right? So a millimeter square doesn't go into a centimeter squared 10 times. I can have 10 going this way, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There's also 10 going this way. So basically I need 100 of these squares to fit inside that, right? So 10 millimeters make a centimeter, but 10 millimeter squares make a centimeter squared. So basically what I'm saying is you need a different flowchart, and you can't automatically assume just because you know length and you've learnt those facts back, you know, as a young child, that it works for area as well. Okay, so what we need to give you and what you'll need to put down with your other flowchart are the area conversions, right? So you'll know you're working with area when you get the squared on your unit, right? Kilometer squared, meter squared, centimeter squared, millimeter squared. We can also work with hectares if necessary. You'd turn it into meters squared first and then make your hectares because that's the easiest way to make them relate. Okay, but if you see squareds, you need to look at this flowchart. You need to use different numbers, bigger numbers, right? We've got millions here and 10,000s here, and we'll rock with those ones. All right, so your questions for area will look very similar to your length ones. All right, we're not doing anything too fancy today. Nice to have a nice, easy, straightforward lesson after all the algebra we've just done. So again, you'll just be asked to turn an amount of squared units into either a bigger, smaller amount of different sized units, right? So 6 square centimeters, you can picture 6 little squares on your thing. We need to turn them into square millimeters. Square millimeters are much smaller than square centimeters, so you'll need an answer much bigger than 6. You'll need lots of them to fill up the same space. So you just go to the right spot on your flowchart and look for how centimeters squared turn into millimeters squared. Right, make sure you go the right way. Make sure you choose division or multiplication as necessary. So we started with centimeters squared and we're making millimeters squared, so we're going this way. Okay, so we're going to be multiplying by 100. So all we've really got to do is go 6 times 100. And then we can write down our answer and make sure we put the units, right? Centimeters, and they're not just centimeters, they're centimeters squared, which are different than centimeters, because centimeters go in a straight line, centimeters squared go in 2 dimensions. All right, so turning 750,000 meters squared, right? So a meter squared is a meter by a meter, and I've got 750,000 of those. So it's a block of land, I guess, or something. I want to make kilometers squared out of it. Go to your flowchart, find the right spot, and it says that, well, a million meters squared fit into a kilometer squared, right? Because I'm going from meters to kilometers, I'm going to be dividing by a million. Right, so we're going to go 750,000. We're going to run out of space, right? It's such a long sum. We're going to divide by a million. Make sure you got the right amount of zeros in your calculator, or however it is that you're solving it. So let's get rid of one here. So it's actually 750,000, and it's actually a million. All right, and that would just equal, right? 750,000 isn't as big as a million, so we don't even have a whole kilometer squared. We have 0.75 kilometers squared, right? Less than 1 square kilometer, because it can hold a million of these smaller units. And then hectares will pop up, right? This isn't laughing at you, it's telling you to turn something into hectares. So 80,000 meters squared into hectares. You can come to this special spot of your flowchart, and it says to turn meters squared into hectares going that way, divide by 10,000. So 80,000 divide 10,000 equals 8, right? We have 8 hectares in that block of land, 8 HA. Right, so area works the same way as length. Just make sure you're using the right flowchart and you're using the right numbers, because they scale differently, and the numbers get a lot bigger and a lot smaller, depending on what units you're working with. So to just summarize your process for today's lesson and make sure you get this right, because it's going to be really hard for you guys going forward when you are solving area, perimeter, and volume problems, because the book's going to throw questions at you with mixed units. There's going to be centimeters down one side, millimeters down the other. You're going to have to make them the same unit. If you can't convert, you won't get any questions right when you do all that stuff. So what you really need to be doing, first of all, pay attention to whether your units are measuring length or area, because they're different units and there's different flow charts to help you solve them, right? So if I get a question like this, 4 kilometers into centimeters, I don't see any squares on them, right? So these are length units. Right, we're really just thinking that internally. We should note our starting unit and the type we want to make it into, right? So we are given the amount 4 kilometers, right? Big long distance. And we need to turn that into centimeters, right? Into a very small unit. So we should already be thinking, I need lots more centimeters than I do kilometers to get that same distance. If I'm putting little centimeters end on end till I get to 4 kilometers, I'm going to need an awful lot. Okay, and then we go to our flowchart and we see what we need to do, right? So we can see our flowchart tells us to get from kilometers into centimeters, I've got to multiply by 1,000 and then by 100. So you can do it in 2 steps or do it in 1, times by 100,000, but just trust the flowchart. Start with your 4 kilometers. Feel free to do it all in one go in your calculator though, just with your typing in. 4 times 1,000 times 100. It's going to be a 4 with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros after it. 400,000. And then if we're really lazy, don't put our units in our answer, then that could be 400,000 anything, right? It could be 400,000 Purple Monkey dishwashers. This answer is in centimeters, so make sure you include the units in your work and say it's 400,000 centimeters, right? So if you can just be logical and follow this process, tell the difference between length and area, that's the main thing. Follow your flowchart, put your units in your work, you'll get 100% and be ready to move on to something a bit trickier than converting.